learning how to visually interpret information and create a painting is not a simple task to talk about. So, in this week's episode in particular, I created a whole different kind of way to explore the topic of how to use planes. Now, since the topic is about how to work with planes, we're going to be working with one of the studio paintings that I have going on currently. I had a little bit of artist block for quite a while, so I decided to bring you along the journey or part of the journey of one of my current studio paintings. So, as you're seeing, I'm beginning the grisaille by filling in the darkest areas first, and I'm just using titanium white and burnt umber with Liquin as my medium. I'm working on a canvas that I stretched myself and toned with burnt umber acrylic paint. The drawing that I created for this you can actually see on my Instagram, but I'll insert a picture of it right here. It is a graphite drawing that I created probably a couple weeks ago. As I mentioned earlier, I had some severe case of artist block, still kind of have it, which makes it kind of difficult to come up with ideas for paintings and topics. Usually, the way I try to get out of artist block is to just start working, just start drawing or whatever. That's how this painting initially began. So the model Madeline, I took a bunch of pictures of her, as you've seen in many of the other YouTube episodes, and this pose that she's in is a painting that or this pose I've been wanting to create a painting of for quite some time, and I really didn't want to do another head and shoulders, basic kind of painting for this episode. So I decided to just film how I went about starting the grisaille, and then the idea hit me that I can devote this episode to planes. So for the major planes, we're going to look at it a completely different way. For this episode, what you're seeing here is the linear construct of how I conceptualize the planes of the head. Not generic planes, but how I conceptualize the planes of the head on our model. Here is the angle of the light source, and then when we determine the angle of the light source, we will then transition into this, which is a more three-dimensional construct for how the plane should determine what values each area should have. Alright, so here's the strategy of how to use planes. So in the top left corner, you're seeing the plane head along with the red outlines indicating the boundary of each plane. So we're going to use that as our reference rather than using the photo reference. Now the photo reference will be back in a later segment of this episode. And remember, the photo reference and the plane head will be in the Facebook photo reference group. So check out the Facebook photo reference group in the description box down below if you would like to have access to those references. Now, the purpose of the plane head in this demonstration in particular is to provide you with insight as to how I conceptualize planes and structures. So pay very close attention to each individual plane change, or should I say each individual value change, because the way that we're describing these planes and the angle that the plane makes with respect to the light source is via values. So remember, each area that is closer to perpendicular to the light source is lighter, and it gets darker and darker the closer it gets to becoming parallel to the light source. Now, in a very simplified manner, you're starting to see how we're putting in a little bit of a darker shape for the plane for the upper eyelid as it transitions, the angle transitions with respect to the light source. You can see it in the plane head, the diagram for the plane head. Now think of the features as being built right onto these larger structures. So that's why in the plane head you don't really see too much of the features. And in the forehead I decided to leave it flat. Now there are planes on the forehead, of course, but for this demonstration in particular I didn't choose to emphasize the forehead. So just a simple flat shape will do. I did put a little bit of a lighter plane or a little bit of a side plane to the forehead in the painting, but not so much in the plane head diagram. Now you're seeing the bottom of um, the nose, the bottom of the wing of the nose, sorry, and how it's a little bit lighter. And now after we put that lighter plane, we're putting in the little angle for the nostril. Again, we're relating every single one of these planes on the painting to the conceptualized image of the plane head. Remember, the plane head, again, is standing in for the way that I conceptualize these forms. And I think that everyone should memorize the generic plane head. So you can find this with a very simple Google search, generic planes of the human head. But what you want to do is not make your models planes or the structures of your model's face look like a generic plane head. Instead, you want to think about what those planes look like on your individual model and how it varies from the generic head. See how there's a little bit of a darker transition beneath of the mandible? That's because that plane, again, is transitioning a little bit away from the light. Now we're moving closer to the light, closer to perpendicular to the light source as we move our way towards the sternocleidomastoid, basically the neck muscle right there, as it turns and tapers and starts to face the light a little bit more. Now I will add some variation to the narration of this episode just so I don't fill it with too much talk. And for those of you that are wondering how I created the plane head, how I created the diagram, I just used a free drawing app for the tablet. So I used, it's called Drawing Desk, I believe. Probably not the best drawing tool that I could have used, but it was enough to get the job done. I drew directly over top of a picture of my painting with the paintbrush tool and then outlined it with the pencil tool. But in any case, now you're starting to see how I actually unified the cheekbone. The zygomatic bone, I actually decided to unify it in the beginning with the side plane of the lower portion, or the portion below the cheekbone. Now you can see it clearly delineated in the plane head, but I unified it to begin with in the painting. Now bear in mind, as I'm going to speak about this a lot in this episode, this is how you use planes, or should I say more specifically, this is how I use planes. So what I do is conceptualize the image that I'm looking at. So the plane head that you're seeing is actually a way that you can see into my thoughts, into how I conceptualize individual structures, individual large structures of the model, and interpret that visual information to create the painting. Now you're seeing the lightest area to the side of the wing of the nose. You can see it on the plane head, how it turns across towards the nostril and then goes completely flat. And that plane is pretty much perpendicular to the light source. It's a little pocket of light, and that's why we have a highlight on the side of the wing of the nose. And there I'm just going to emphasize the highlight a little bit more. Again, just using titanium white, burnt umber, and Liquin as my medium. And again, we're pushing the variation between the plane for the side of the eye socket. So this lighting is a little different. It's a little, I'd say, a little unusual compared to usual lighting that you see in the portrait painting demonstrations that I usually do. So it actually adds a little bit of contrast to the variation between the planes, as you're seeing that there's more light right beneath the lower lip, more light right beneath the side of the corner of the eye socket, and as we approach the mandible. So the light is actually coming from a little bit of an angle below to the right, as was illustrated earlier in the little diagram. Now we're pulling this plane closer to the light beneath the lower eyelid. Again, that structure, that smaller structure of the lower eyelid, you can see towards the side of the eye socket in the plane head, as there's a little bit of a transition there. And there you're seeing the little pocket of light to the left of the concavity of the eye socket relative to the screen. And there you're seeing the brushstrokes almost moving in the exact same position as the cartilage of the nose, the plane that was drawn out for the top plane of the nose. And then there we're putting in a little bit more of a flat shape there for the glabella. Now I chose to focus, I chose to move the photo reference for the plane head, so you're seeing a little bit more of a closer view for the plane divisions for the eye socket and how it pertains to the value transitions on the face. Notice how unified the values are for the eyelid. They're very simple. None of them are poking out or sticking out of the overall large structure of the eye socket, just as you're seeing in the diagram, as I made all of the values surrounding the eye flat, very much just like a sculptor would be molding clay. Now I apologize that you can't really see the mixtures on the wooden palette, but again, this is pretty much just all in monochrome. Now I'm starting to put in more light, and then I kind of blended the light away, as this is an underpainting, so I continue to delineate planes and then unify them, and then continue to build and build and build in that kind of way. Now, especially with an underpainting where you're given the most flexibility with the planes of the face, you want to work as light as possible. Since this is one of my studio paintings, this is a painting that I will continue to work on for several days, several sessions. So I wanted to make sure that the initial foundation for the face was as light as possible. Now with the photo reference, you're seeing two images to the left. So this is kind of a first, I think, in my YouTube channel, where you're seeing two images to the left and then the painting on the right. So there's something to be said about this. So you're seeing the face on the top left corner of the screen, just the photo reference itself. And then beneath it, you're seeing how my mind conceptualizes each one of the forms, trying to see the volume of the face. So this is the way that you can use planes. You must learn how to see volumes as opposed to just copying values from a photograph. And there we're going to throw in a little bit more light for the lower lip. Now it's a very slight transition lighter that we're putting on the lower lip. Now in the diagram for the plane head, it's pretty much just one plane to the right, one plane to the left, which is of course an oversimplification, but it provides pretty much the big picture aspect for the planes and should I say for the values as they transition across on the lips. And moving up again towards the philtrum. You can even see it on the diagram, the little I guess triangular looking shape above the upper lip is the shape of the philtrum. The philtrum is usually the kind of teardrop looking shape that is beneath the nose and right above the top middle portion of the upper lip. Now for the planes of the head and how to use planes, I decided to focus the diagram on the face. And now with the other areas of the painting, such as the neck, the ear, the hand, the arm, all of the plane changes, basically the visual language that we're using in the painting is the exact same in the rest of the structure. So what I'm trying to say is the way that I conceptualize form, as I've been talking throughout this entire episode, the way I conceptualize form on the face is the same way that I conceptualize form for the hand, the neck, the shoulder, the clavicle. It's the same kind of thinking. But admittingly, I find that faces are much more difficult to draw, much more difficult to see three-dimensionally, much more difficult to conceptualize, just because of that psychological factor that we're drawing a person. But once you can do this on the human head, on the face, applying that to other structures such as the hand, the elbow, the neck, or even other types of things that you would paint, such as still life or things like that. It's the same type of visual language. It's the same type of tools that I demonstrated for you earlier in the episode with the planes of the face. And we're just going to put a little bit of light on the side on the eye to the left of the screen. I believe I only put about 2 or 3 lines in the shadow side for the diagram, only showing the areas that I would put in light and pretty much flattening out the rest of the shadow in the diagram. As you can see in the photo reference relating the diagram to the photo reference, on the shadow side of the face in the photo reference, you don't really see too much, and that would be actually very similar to what you would see if you were working from the live model. Of course, I will always emphasize working from life as much as possible, as it makes this process much simpler. Now, another very important aspect to working with planes is learning how to key your values. And that is pretty much the stage that I'm at now in the footage, at least in this portion, this very early portion of the underpainting. So learning how to key Values means exactly this. So we put in a light shape, just as you saw me do, for the palm of the hand there, and I'm relating the brightness of that value to the surrounding lights. And that word relating, say, relating the light on the side of the face, relating that to the flower that we're sketching in, and relating that to the clavicle and the forearm, as you're seeing me paint kind of aggressively there. The word relating light planes to one another is what I mean by keying the light. And this is why I highly recommend, especially when you're just getting started with painting and drawing, when you're studying planes, to do this in monochrome, whether it's black and white, or in this case, burnt umber and titanium white. You're seeing very explicitly value relationships and how it relates to planes. See how we're putting in that very simplified flat plane for the side of the elbow, and now with a little less pressure on the brush, the values start to get darker as it moves away from the light. See, the exact same thinking is going into the arm as was going on with the face. Thinking of the angle that the plane makes with respect to the light source, and thinking about the boundary of the form, the shape that the form makes is, again, just like the plane head, just like the red pencil markings on the plane head, thinking about the shape of each individual plane. Now, another highly important, at least in my opinion, factor to working with planes is once you memorize the big planes of the face, once you learn how to take all of that information in, the anatomical structures that as we've been talking about throughout pretty much all of these videos, beware the tendency to overgeneralize a face. So once you learn the basic planes of the face, try and see how those planes vary on your individual model, vary within your individual painting, and that will give more character in your individual painting. It's another thing that will help to achieve likeness. Likeness being a resemblance to the model. And there we're putting in another little plane chop for the elbow. Now this is another little trick with planes. On the photo reference, the elbow is pretty much flat. I don't really see a value transition right here on the elbow on the photo reference, but conceptually I know that the elbow is turning away from the light as we approach the bottommost portion of the arm. Basically, as we're moving down, the form is turning away from the light. So I chose to put that value transition in, even though it's not really that apparent on the photo reference. And we'll throw in a little bit of a highlight, as this plane is the most perpendicular to the light source on the elbow. Remember, the light's coming from below, a little bit below to the right. And then as I'm saying this, remember that the camera is a little bit at an angle with respect to the painting. I apologize. I know there's requests to bring the camera back to the front of the painting, but that it just complicates the painting process for me a little bit too much, having a camera right in front of me and having to bend over the camera to paint. So this is just the easier way, the most manageable way for me to produce these paintings. But in any case, returning back to the topic of working with planes, you want to keep your grouping of planes as organized as possible. Now, I say the word simplify, simplify, simplify all the time, but here in this underpainting, you're seeing an organization of tones, an organization of values. Now, in the plane head, I exaggerated the brightness and contrast of individual plane changes. And that was for educational purposes with the plane head. But in the painting, do you see how very close together these lights are? And that also corresponds to how you would develop an underpainting. So if you're developing an underpainting in order to prepare your surface to work over it with color, glazes of color, you want to work as light as possible. But that doesn't mean that you don't necessarily put in plane changes. Obviously, we put in plane changes, but we're making the grouping of the values as organized and as minimal as possible. Just like in anything in life, when you're working with planes, less is more if and only if you know how to organize it in such a way that it optimizes the overall visual effect that you're trying to achieve with your painting. That is, you don't need a lot of different values, just enough to describe the physicality of the form, that is, describe the angle that each plane makes with respect to the light source, and that's it. That's really the secret to working with planes, as you're seeing here. It's all about describing the angle. The angle that each plane is making with respect to the light. Now, with a couple minutes left in this week's episode, what you're going to see is I'm going to continue keying the light. So I'm constantly moving around each one of these planes, trying to group these values together and keep the organization such that it will allow me to continue to build onto this painting. And if you would like to suggest other topics for future painting episodes, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, I was going through and I'm going through some artist block, so that is running out of ideas. Go ahead and comment down below what topics you would like me to cover. Even if I've covered these topics before, I can always try to figure out new insights into how to explain these topics. And if you would like to see more footage on the development of this individual painting, I can also do that. Just go ahead and comment down below that you would like to see this painting developed even further. But if you don't want to see this in video, go ahead and check out my Instagram, as I will continue to post pictures on the development of this painting and other paintings just like it that I'm working on in the studio. We're just putting in a plane change there for the clavicle. The clavicles, I don't really get too much into figure painting here, but clavicle, the halftone for the clavicle there is usually something you want to be very cautious about. It's a halftone that gets easily overemphasized. So whenever you're trying to describe plane change for the clavicle, that is the collarbone, be very, very subtle, even more subtle than what you're seeing in the photo reference. So remember, it's all about learning how to conceptualize what you're observing, whether it be from photo reference or from working from nature. That being said, I really hope that this week's episode helps you out. If you would like to see more painting videos just like this one, please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you would like to support this channel even more. I have a Patreon account. If you would like to see more of my artwork, check out the Instagram page that I have. And if you would like to have access to this photo reference, I have the link to the Facebook photo reference group. And I also have paintings for sale on Etsy. Now it's time for our new patron shout out. Thank you so much, Sue Williams, for becoming a new patron on my Patreon account. Your support means so much to me. The support of all of my patrons means so much to me, and it is what helps to make videos such as this one possible. Thanks again so much. I wish you the best in all of your artwork, and I'll see you on the next episode.